Today on the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast.
Hey, whoa. Jeff, this is my podcast.
Oh, sorry.
Today
what? Where are we?
We are actually today on superhero ethics, but we do have both Jeff Randle and Matthew Carroll here from the MCU cast to help us discuss when Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility, is he right? All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back, everyone, to the Superhero Ethics Podcast. I'm Matthew, your host. As I mentioned, I'm joined by both of the hosts of the MCU cast, people who really helped get me started and become good friends, and people I've been really excited to talk to you about this topic with. So, Jeff, Matt, how are we doing today?
Doing well, man.
Fantastic, sir. How are you?
Doing good. Looking forward to this topic. I know it's one on your cast, the MCU cast. You guys every now and then get into some of these questions, so it's excited to give you guys a chance just to really spend a couple hours just talking about this one. And we're talking about today this question of, is Uncle Ben right? And we're going to expand it out, not just to be about that general idea, but or not just about that specific thing he says, but really to go on this general idea of what is the responsibility of a hero? Or maybe put better, what's the responsibility of a powered person? If you wind up having superpowers, either because you go for them or because they are forced on you or they happen to you by accident, does that give you the responsibility to be a hero? Does it give you the responsibility to not make the same kind of romantic or family or career decisions someone else would make? What is it that we expect you to do, and is that fair? So we're going to talk about some specifics. Let me start just with the general. Like, what's your guys' thoughts on that general idea, and what made you excited about wanting to talk about it today?
Matt, do you want to start?
So, yeah, it's an interesting question. It gets into the very core of what you believe as morality in general. Like, what do we all have responsibility to do with ourselves? Just at all, right. Even if with any power does responsibility come, because we all have power, no matter what station you're in life, you all have the ability. The vast majority of us have some ability to affect others, even if it's just with our attitudes or with our whatever actions we can take. And what responsibility do we have to other people at all? Yeah. And so, I think as a society we function best when we have some responsibility to one another. But where does it cross the line to where you're like, you are responsible to do this thing? And when does it cross the line back to the society is controlling you and you have no freedom of choice for yourself,
Right. Yeah, I like the idea of the general idea of responsibility, that we have responsibility towards each other, but when does that become, you're a woman, you have a responsibility to have children and to make a nice home. You're a man, so you have a responsibility to go do backbreaking labor to support a family, whatever it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be on gender lines, but yeah, there's a lot of ways in which the idea of responsibility can become a real kind of social pressure, as well as just, does a superhero have to have that? Jeff, what about you? Where do you come down on this?
Well, I mean, like all of us, I grew up watching all of these superhero cartoons and reading these things that are you have to do what you can to help society, or if you have this greatness thrust upon you, it's it becomes your responsibility almost immediately to do good things with it. And when I was young, I just took that at face value of okay, yeah, sure. If, I have to do what I can, I have to do my part. And that's a good thing to instill in a kid, I guess. But there does have to be it seems like there's no temperance with it. Yeah. And there needs to be a bit of there's a bit more nuance in society now. And there's a bit more nuance just in the world. There always has been, but, being a little bit older than, when I was growing up with those cartoons, I think it's our responsibility as adults to kind of have that introspection and that discussion within ourselves of challenging those moral directions that we grew up with, just to see is this right for me? And I think that this discussion is, it's a little bit more of a fun take on it with heroes and whatnot, but it does have that general, you know, general outlook on life part to it that is obviously going to come into it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, especially because, you know, I do this podcast because I think that as fun and exciting as superhero stories are, and, you know, I'm never going to have to decide, like, you know, do I use my web shooter or do I climb a building, you know, but I think there are choices that we all have to make in our lives, and I like looking to these stories to see how do they influence ourselves. And, you know, I think today we're going to be kind of talking about it in terms of, like, do superpowers make you more responsible than anybody else? But even in our own world, we have huge variances of the different amounts of power different people have and what responsibility they do or don't have. I think a lot of the scene in Justice League, one of the few moments in that movie I really love, where the Flash asks Batman, "So what's your superpower?" And he just looks at him and goes, "I'm rich." Because they're kind of saying, like, in that world, yeah, that kind of is a superpower, as it is in ours, as different kinds of all sorts of things can be. So yeah, it's an interesting way to kind of to dive into all this. And I think it's particularly interesting because, and you guys really look into the MCU more than I do, but my sense is, as someone who's watched almost all of it, it seems like this is an issue that the MCU, especially in this recent versions, has really been exploring. A lot of the Netflix shows went into this, especially with characters like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, who really kind of didn't want to have this responsibility and really fought against it. And I think there's been other characters we've seen, and like some of the villains are ones who seem to feel this responsibility almost a little bit too much. Matt, I know you pointed out Fisk is someone who seems to believe that his great power brings great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, like, the MCU has been kind of particularly exploring these questions?
I think absolutely. I do still think, as we mentioned, it's pretty one-sided. I think the Marvel Universe believes in the Spider-Man principle, not surprisingly. Right. I don't think we get much, with the one very, very notable exception. I guess we're spoiler alert for all the MCU, including Endgame. The one really notable exception is the last act of Captain America deciding to go and live a life. Right. That is him deciding, at least as far as we understand it, to live a normal life with Peggy when he could continue the fight. And that is them acknowledging that there's a time for self-care in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what we're getting at, is like this idea of responsibility. You have to pair it with the idea of self-care, which couched differently comes off as selfishness, you know? And I think the reason we are so inclined to teach this to children and inclined to include it in our Spider-Man comic books is because I don't think it's easy for a kid to default to selfishness. Right. And not all kids do, but it is very easy for a kid to default to selfishness. Like, I want my toy, I want my this, and you do. That's why we use, you know, all of these allegories, all of our religions, all of our whatever we can to instill these values into children, that we say, no, that's not how you should be. You should be this way because it's better for everyone else. And you know, it's interesting because I think in my case, like my religion that I grew up in, I think I ended up believing that to the point, because of the culture I was raised in, I ended up believing that to the point that, like, nothing that I did for myself was okay, you know? And I think that pushed me too far to where I believed every action I should take should be for the greater good. The greater. And then you can't, we as humans, that is, so what is the problem with that? What is the problem? And I think for one thing, it's sustainability. Like, I don't think it's sustainable to always, you're going to burn out. You're going to become the villain, basically, just by burnout. Or you become way less effective. So, like, some sort of self-care is, I think, what we're talking about here. I think we all agree that it is good to use your power for good, but it is also good to have a balance of self-care, right? Is that kind of what we're honing in on this whole issue?
I think so, yeah. And I imagine that most of this conversation is going to be talking about, like, how we find that balance and examples of folks we think went too far one side or the other.
Well, it does kind of feel like Captain America buried himself in service for his entire life, and then at the end,
he buried himself in ice.
that too. I mean, literally, that's part of his service. Like,
Yeah.
he was like, it's for the greater good. I'm gonna bury this thing in ice, and he went with it. And then he served so much, he gave so much of himself that in the end, he's like, I need to rest. Like, I've got to go and be with Peggy, and that's the life I'm going to choose right now. And I could come right back, but I'm not going to come right back.
Yeah, but there's an interesting, a different aspect on that, or something that you could easily be overlooked. With Captain America in that situation, Captain America knew that there were all these other people that had come together behind him to save the world. If he went away, all these other people will still be there and they'll pick up the torch. He's handing off the flag to them so that they can go. So, in that particular instance, if you forget about the rest of the heroes, it's really selfish that Cap could have lived another, 30, 40, 50 years and still been a great hero and done all these great things. But he's also given up so much of his life. If you think about everybody else that was there, like, it's probably reasonable for him to retire and have that opportunity that he never would have had otherwise without this, in this specific time travel situation.
And I think that's a really good point. There's when I was in grad school, studying to be like a community organizer and an activist, I think this was on like our opening day, assembly, or convocation, whatever it was. And the dean of the school asked us to look around at everyone else and basically said to us, listen, you're all here because you want to use whatever power you have to try and make the world a better place. But that you have to remember that there's a danger of a real hubris that can come from that, of a sense of like, there's a problem in the world, I have to fix it. And so he really wanted us to like look at each other and remember like all these people are in the same fight that you are. And so it's okay to sometimes say, I'm going to step back so that this other person can do it. And I think that's a really good point because I think that is kind of what, like, for Captain America to do that when there's no one else, I think would be very different than what he does. The other thing I think, though, is, I will start getting into more specifics, but this, just kind of on this general conversation, and I'm wondering if you guys agree with this. It seems that part of where at least the MCU stories are really going towards, and especially this happened in Endgame, but also with, I think, Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, is kind of the idea of heroes saying, okay, I'm going to accept responsibility, but I'm going to do it on my terms. That both Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are going to be the heroes who they think they should be, rather than just like the heroes who it seems the whole rest of the world seems to want them to be. And in the case of Cap, to me, the moment I think that was really interesting was Tony. Because in Endgame, Tony at first really doesn't want to make that choice. He wants to say, look, I have my daughter, I have my family, this terrible thing happened, but life has moved on, and I'm not willing to risk losing these things in order to help bring other things back. And at least my sense watching it was, I don't think the movie is portraying him as selfish. I mean, I think they're saying, like, he's making his choice and he's not being as self-sacrificing as someone like Cap. But I got the sense that the movie was saying that Tony was making a reasonable argument, and this might be entirely headcanon on my part. I kind of think maybe that's part of what inspires Cap to say, you know what, maybe Tony's right, maybe we should be trying to balance somewhat, and that's maybe why I should be willing to hang up the shield. Is that entirely in my head, or do you guys get any of that as well?
I did not see that connection until you say it, but I like it a lot. I almost wish they had drawn that on screen, because I do think it. I think it's headcanon, but I think it's good headcanon. I think it's he's watching that balance play out and watching Tony have a life and the life he never got to have.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Matt's definitely the headcanon expert. So if you get the sign off from him, like, you're good.
Well, let me just ask you this. Do you think the movie is showing Tony as being kind of selfish when he says, like, I will only do this if I can keep my daughter? Or do you think that his position is kind of a reasonable one in terms of finding that balance?
Well, I mean, you could easily say that he was being selfish by coming to help everybody, because if he didn't, come up with the solution to time travel, then, or rather, if he didn't use the solution to time travel that he had come up with, he never would have let his mind rest, so to speak. So it was just him showing up to put his mind at ease. Like, oh yeah, see, I can now say that I explored that possibility as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because the way they set it up, the fact that they give him a daughter and they give him a life with Pepper and the daughter to like have as a reason, so it makes it not selfish. If he had just been like, you know what, I'm happy, my company's doing well, as a like I'm a single guy and I'm happy with my life, I don't want to lose my life, as a like culture, we would not accept that.
Yeah.
He has to have a daughter and a wife and this life that he's scared of losing, that we go because it doesn't come off as selfish because it's that. And then just like Jeff said, when he decides to do it, he has that conversation with Pepper. He's like, I have this idea, I could just put it away. And she's like, no, you can't. This is who you are. You can't help yourself but to go jump into these adventures. And you need to. So it actually, the way the movie portrays it is, it's almost more of a selfish act that he decides to go and save the world.
Tony's the villain.
No, Team Tony forever.
Someone asked me on Twitter, I think it was Vibrant Jax from our Twitch streams or whatever, asked me on Twitter last night, who's your favorite villains, MCU villains? And I named 3 villains and then Tony Stark.
Yeah, well, I think you raised an interesting point. I would actually even twist it a little bit more to say maybe with Tony, it's actually raising another interesting spin on the whole Uncle Ben, which I know that's what his name is, but every time I say Uncle Ben, I think of selling rice, unfortunately. But in some ways, Tony is faced with a thing that, Ben Parker never really considered, which is what happens when it's not, do you do your own thing or do you live up to your responsibility? It's what happens when you have two conflicting responsibilities. Because, what Tony is balancing is, I have a responsibility to, the world and maybe the whole universe of people I don't know, versus the responsibility I have to my actual daughter and to Pepper and to like the family that I've created. And so I think that's another interesting way of looking at it, is what happens when it's not, are there really ever moments when it's just about, my selfishness, or is it always about balancing different responsibilities?
I mean, it's always really easy for Peter Parker to say, like, with great power comes great responsibility, because he's like pretty much all the time in the comics he's a single guy, or he's got a girlfriend and he's living alone in an apartment. Like, at that point, if you're not going out to use your superpowers for good, then really you're just a lazy 20-something, in your apartment. Like,
all right, as a single person, I have to take exception with that. You married person, like that is a trope that I actually really hate. That single lives, it literally, I did not mean to do this. I do not mean to draw a parallel between Black Lives Matter, but I was about to say single lives matter. Like, single people have lives that they care about, and like they're, they have their own lives that and sometimes have chosen to live those lives, and they are not less valuable than. And that's kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about this, this Tony situation. As a culture, we would look at that and go, if he was a single man with just a job that he was happy doing, we would go, oh, that's really selfish. Like, we need to give him other people in his life to care about. But the question is, when is it okay? Really, what we're talking about, though, in this episode of this podcast is like, when is it okay to say, no, I'm not going to do the thing that saves lives, or like whatever, because I need time for me. Like, I need to do this for me. When do you really turn your back on responsibility? When is that okay? Like,
yeah, I think
if it is it ever.
I think the point about singleness is fantastic, because I do think, like, if you truly are an island, if you have no connection to anybody else, I do still think your responsibility towards yourself and towards self-care is important. But the other thing I think that you're pointing out, and it's definitely a trope that I fell into there for a moment, is, we can really privilege, like, biological or marriage, romantic relationships in a way that sort of like that those are important, in the way that, like, yeah, Peter Parker has, he does have a couple of very good friends. He does have, a position at the newspaper, even with a boss who hates him and is maniacal. But like, it's really easy to see, like, well, like you have a wife and a kid, so your life matters. Your life should be protected more than a single person's, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a great point.
Well, I mean, and that's the exact thing that we encounter with Natasha and Clint on Boromir.
Oh God, yeah.
She wants to throw herself off. Boromir. What?
It's Vormir, not Boromir. Boromir was in Lord of the Rings.
Sorry.
Who also had a very strong responsibility to protect the people of Gondor in a way that I thought the movies didn't give enough credit to. Anyway, go on. I just did a whole live tweet of watching the movies and how in the extended edition, it does a much better job of highlighting the fact that Boromir isn't just selfish, but has this whole responsibility towards Gondor, which is why he wants the ring. Anyway, total side note, but it does tie in.
That's really interesting. I did not remember that. Yeah, Boromir, sorry. Yeah, when Clint and Natasha are on that cliff, that's definitely part of the conversation. If not, I can't remember exactly what they're saying. I don't remember how much they actually explicitly say it, but it's definitely the audience's minds. Like, he has his family he's trying to win his family back, and he has a family to go back to. And Natasha has been sitting alone in a room with only her work as an Avenger, and it's kind of a sad, lonely life. And I kind of wish that we'd get the trope of a single person who loves what they do, and they have to make the decision to like possibly give that up to go serve as an Avenger or whatever. Like, whatever. Whatever. I mean, in my life, like, I'm a musician. I love being a musician. I miss it when I can't do it. And if I had to go like be an Avenger instead of being a musician, and like, I have a girlfriend. I'm not completely single, but like, I'm not married and I don't have kids, and so those responsibilities are not what I have. But I do have a life that I like. That's
the next time you tell us you can't record at a certain time because you have to spend time with your girlfriend, I'm going to remind you of your whole "you have no responsibility" thing. But I do understand your point.
It's just like I don't have that same responsibility that they put up on the screen, and it is different. Like, it's different. Like, people treat a girlfriend different than they do a wife in a movie. That's what interests me, is like when you really don't have anyone else you're turning to be responsible for, because that does give us as an audience a little bit of cushion where we're like, okay, he's not being selfish, he has a family. So what does it mean if you don't have a family? And it's not even for your friends. It's just like, or is it good at all? Or is that what we're saying? Is that a line that we're willing to draw? Is like, is it just, if you don't have anyone else you're turning your back for, is it purely selfish? And is that bad?
Well, and I think that gets into the other main question that I really want to talk about, and this is kind of what I was getting at in terms of like people like Luke and Jessica redefining it, is who gets to decide what your responsibility is. Like, we live in a society, we all live in societies of some kind or another that often tell us like what our responsibilities are, and you go on Twitter and there's a whole bunch of people on Twitter who will tell you what a whole bunch of other people's responsibilities are from all different directions. I certainly, a lot of me and my fellow lefties will be very happy to tell Jeff Bezos what his responsibilities are with all of his economic power. And that might be just as screwed up. Like, I think there's a lot of great conversation here about who gets to define who is responsible for what.
Well, and off mic, before we started this, we're talking about wearing masks right now, and it's exactly the same thing. Like, I'm in Alabama, and it's making me pretty upset because I know that masks, when you wear a mask, you're protecting other people. Like, that's mostly what you're doing. You're protecting yourself some, but most of the percentage of protection is for other people. So it is a responsibility thing to wear a mask. And, I'm going out in Alabama, and I went out the other day, and literally one person in the entire place was wearing a mask. Out of about 40 people or 50 people. And it just really, really frustrates me that no one's trying to protect each other out there.
Yeah, that's actually, I think the mask thing is a fantastic example, because all of us have a responsibility to be doing something, to be wearing the mask. And at the same time, the people with more power, the people who are on TV more, the people who are more public figures, like, the owner of a restaurant has the power to insist that the people who come into his their restaurant wears masks, because that person has a little more power. So maybe they have a little more responsibility. The person who's on TV a lot, maybe they have even more power, and so they have even more of a responsibility. At least I think that's how Uncle Ben would see it, and that we can carry that forward.
But Matthew, it's my body, my choice. Oh wait.
Yeah, that's well, and that's the thing. Is like,
it's not a dumb. I mean, like, obviously, you're calling into question a larger argument that we probably don't want to have on this episode.
Yeah. But well, but I think I will say, actually, I think that question, and what I believe is a complete misuse of that political phrase, gets to the heart of what we're talking about, which is, like I'm going to go off on kind of a weird tangent here, but I think it's related. I think that I have the right to shoot as much heroin into my body as I want to. And to me, that is part of my body, my choice. Like, if I want to destroy my body with drugs, I think I have the right to do that. What I don't have the right to do is to put heroin into my body and then get behind the wheel of a car, because now I'm, putting other people's lives at risk. And I think that, it's the whole concept of I have the freedom to swing my fist in whatever direction it goes until my fist connects with your face, because I don't have the freedom to use my body in a way that harms others. And to me, that's why the whole my body, my choice thing doesn't apply to this mask thing, because, it's not like, if someone wants to go find somebody who has COVID and like breathe in their air and get COVID, I kind of think they're being really dumb, and maybe I'm not thrilled about the healthcare system paying for that, but sure, your body, your choice. It's the like going out without a mask and going out to like infect others, that's where it gets dumb.
Yeah. And I think that that argument stems from them not having a fundamental understanding of the mask isn't for you, the mask is for other people.
Yeah, I don't think anyone gets that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's where it gets kind of backwards.
If we had leadership right now in this country, and I know that you often talked about your left-leaning politics in this podcast, so I don't think that you mind me going political. But like, yeah, I am not a one-sided person. I'm a pretty moderate guy when it comes to politics, but this whole thing about Trump not being willing to wear a mask and not encouraging his supporters to do so is causing people to die. Like, he has great power, and he's using it in the worst possible way out of pure hubris, and the idea of him not wearing a mask and everyone else around him wearing a mask is the like darkest, most dystopian shit. Like, It is awful. When I see a room full of his staffers all wearing masks, all protecting him, and he will not, it angers me to the point that like it's monstrous. It's absolutely monstrous.
Well, and here's where I think it is that, like, 'cause I agree with you on the politics. I've no one on the politics. I just want to make sure we stay to the topic. But I think it's very relevant here. Is my kind of overall take on the Ben question is, I think, Matt, you said it really well, that it's about finding a balance. And in the superhero stories, there are times when I think the push of responsibility goes a little too far, and I want to push back on the individuality part. But in terms of the message for our society, I think ours is a society in which, at least my opinion, I think we all kind of agree with this, I think that most of us, at least certainly as Americans, we don't have enough of a sense of responsibility of how are the things that we're doing affecting others. And I'm certainly seeing that with the mask thing, of that people just don't have a sense of the choices I make put other people at risk. And so in that regard, I kind of feel like I want our movies and our TV shows to push the balance and not to go too far. But certainly if more of the message we're getting is you have power, please take responsibility, that seems like a good message for our society right now.
It does.
I agree.
That reminds me a lot of the comic The Mighty Avengers. This was in the Marvel universe where, like, right after the Superhero Registration Act went through and Civil War happened and everything, where Tony and Captain Marvel got to basically pick a whole new team. Like, they had never had a choice before on who was on the Avengers and who was available to take on these threats. And so they just put together this big team of heavy hitters, but also, a couple of specialists. And in like their first fight with an Avengers level threat, they're destroying buildings, and the guys are just like, oops, sorry. And like Captain Marvel's like, what are you talking about? Sorry, you're destroying buildings. Like, that's a huge responsibility. What are you doing?
Well, I mean, that's the entire plot of Civil War. Starts with trying to figure out what is Scarlet Witch's responsibility toward, because in Civil War, she's attempting to stop, what's his name? It's not Bone Crusher. It's,
Crossbones.
Crossbones, you know.
Bone crusher.
Bone saws.
That's what it is. That's what I was thinking
If
of.
he blew up where he was, he kills maybe 35 people, maybe even more, maybe hundreds. She's trying to avoid that. She does it in a way that winds up with still a couple people dying, but less. Like, she's attempting to limit that damage. What is her responsibility there? About how good does she have to be? So yeah, I think these questions come up all the time. And let's get a little more into the specifics. And let's just talk just about, for a moment, Ben Parker. What do you think he means specifically, beyond those just couple words, when he says to Peter, with great power comes great responsibility?
Well, at the moment, like at the time when he was saying it, he didn't know that Peter had any kind of power. He didn't know that Peter had superpowers.
Right.
He knew that Peter was a smart kid and, had the world ahead of him, basically, and could have done anything that he wanted, so to speak. I'm
trying to remember now. Have we actually seen him say that in the MCU? Because I know we never got an actual Spider-Man origin story, which I'm glad for, in the MCU with Tom Holland. But has anyone ever said those words to Tom Holland?
Not those specific words.
Right.
Spider-Man, Peter Parker did say, when you can do what I do and you don't, and the bad stuff happens, it happens because of you.
Right.
Which is effectively a paraphrasing.
Which is honestly, given the conversation we're having, is actually a darker paraphrase of that. Because then you're not only, and I mean, that's what the word responsibility means. It is an exact paraphrase, but he's basically saying, when bad things happen, if I don't stop them, I am guilty of the bad things.
Yeah, like all of it is my fault.
Which to me, I mean, that's going a lot further than what Ben says in the comics and the stories. And his own, I feel like I have some material wealth. I have a duty to try and help other people. I don't think homelessness is my fault necessarily. I feel like Peter takes it in a direction that is. Let's definitely circle back to that, because you're right.
But that's the thing. If you could go outside right now and you have a spare room, and there's a homeless man on the street, and you could put him in that room, is it not your fault that person's on the street?
See, and I guess here, and here we're going to go into like basic sociology arguments. The problem with something like that is, I think the problem with that kind of thinking is that it's very individualistic, and it's very much looking at like individual A does this, which causes result B that affects person C. Instead of looking at like, what are all the systemic problems in our world that cause homelessness? Is that homeless man on the street caused because I don't invite him into my house? Or is it caused because I vote for politicians who aren't doing enough to build homeless shelters? Or is it caused because I shop at companies that help perpetuate the economic system? I mean, like, there's so many different levels we can look at it at. And so I feel like I want to stay with what Ben says for a moment, because I feel like Ben's statement is much more open. It's much more saying, like, you have a responsibility without necessarily getting into, like, causation and guilt. But you're right. It is a very interesting the fact that Peter puts that twist on it, I think, is very emblematic of Peter's character, in that he very much is one of those people with the weight of the world on his shoulders, where he looks at anything wrong in the world and says, this is my fault.
Yeah, well, and it goes with the story of Peter and Ben. When he said that, and Peter was like, sure, great power comes great responsibility, whatever. And then immediately after that, he doesn't use his powers to stop a criminal, and that criminal kills Ben. And then he says, when I didn't use my powers to stop the bad thing from happening, the things are my fault. And Ben dying is my fault because I didn't stop the criminal, Well, if that's the story in the MCU, which we don't.
Well, and so here's actually an interesting question: is that a problem with what Ben says? Like, I'm going to stay on the idea that I think Peter taking on that much personal guilt is not the best perspective mentally.
Not for a 15-year-old, especially.
Right. Well, and so is that part of the danger of telling people like that great responsibility comes with great power? Is that if you say that without tempering it at all, that people will take on this kind of idea of, I have to do everything myself because or else I'm going to be haunted by guilt because it is all my fault.
I think the idea is you're just using people up. Like, so as a culture, we put this idea of responsibility in people's heads because that's what we want people to be less selfish. We want people to do the right thing. We want heroes to emerge and if you have this great power or great wealth or whatever, that you use it to help people. The problem is if that's all we teach people to do, they end up becoming kind of used up as human beings because that's all they're for. That's all they think they're for. And I definitely have had that struggle in my own life trying to emerge from sort of the culture I was raised in. Like I'm very much in this exact situation where I feel like I was raised on you are built for this responsibility only. And then I realized, I haven't been making any decisions for me. And then it really does, like, it puts a psychological weight on you, and you have to sort of emerge from that and learn to be yourself. And then you have to learn, I think we should be teaching a balance at some point about self-care and responsibility, for sure.
I'm wondering if we actually have had any villains where this is their origin story, because I think it would be very believable. But I certainly see in our own world, some of the most selfish people that I know are people who really did that. They gave and they gave and they gave and they gave, and they felt like they never got appreciation, or they felt like it never did anything. And eventually they kind of just gave up and made their, heel turn and were like, screw this. I'm done trying to save the world. I'm just going to take care of myself. Is there a supervillain that falls into that category? Like I said, I think, I've seen a lot of people who definitely do that.
In the 90s, Green Lantern went apeshit when Coast City was destroyed and killed all the other lanterns, or all the other Green Lanterns, took all the rings, and became the new, a new supervillain. But then it was like retconned that he was controlled by Parallax and all that crap. But just that by itself is a really, it was a really great look at the superhero he's doing this thing. He's trying to achieve this goal. He's trying to protect Coast City, all the time. That's his place. But then when he can't, and he shouldn't be placed with the sole responsibility of protecting, everything there in the first place. But then when he's got it in his head that all of this happened because I wasn't here to do anything about it, and these other people say that I can't use my power to rebuild it, and then he just goes down a rabbit hole of not dealing with it, not appropriately addressing that pain, and then becomes a new supervillain. That's a huge problem that is inherent in this, in this implied responsibility of putting the entire weight on one person's shoulders.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that happens, I think, with Superman a lot. When he gets affected by the red kryptonite is the one that kind of screws with his mind, right?
Yeah.
And that I think what happens there a lot is that he, that a lot of this kind of this resentment is what comes to the fore of I've been doing all this myself. No one else can help me. And certainly, actually, one thing I definitely do think you see it is, and Matt and I are going to talk about this on Panda Watch, another podcast part of the Stranded Panda Network that's going to get started pretty soon. In the TV show The Boys, I think in both the TV show The Boys and the TV show Umbrella Academy, one of the things it explores is even more so, I think, actually, Umbrella Academy, heroes who have to give up everything, who can't have a personal life, who have to just be heroes, and what that does to a person, and how that breaks you, and how after you get broken, you might just kind of turn everything off and just not want to help anybody.
I wonder if there's also, so we talked about ways to attenuate this idea of responsibility, and some of that is just self-care. But also, is there something to the idea of choice of the kind of mission you take on? And it kind of relates to the Accords. Help me out. Sokovia Accords. It relates to the Sokovia Accords in that these people only do the missions that the government tells them to do, and if they use their powers outside of that, they're in trouble or imprisoned or whatever. I wonder if this sort of burnout we talk about, another way to attenuate for that is
only doing the missions
allowing people
that you're capable of handling without any.
Well, not necessarily capable, but also passionate about certain heroes working on certain problems. I feel like that's the case in our society where, if you have a charity that is your passion that you want to work on, maybe you have more gasoline in the tank to deal with that than you would if you're working in an environment that it's not a thing you're passionate about.
Sorry, Tony. I'm more of a meteors guy.
Well, I mean, I think actually the Netflix MCU did explore that a good deal. Matt Murdock, he cares about Hell's Kitchen. He really cares about his neighborhood. And I think, like, if there's a problem in Queens or in Philadelphia or in Los Angeles, like, maybe you can talk him into helping, but, like, his main focus is Hell's Kitchen. And for Luke Cage, it's issues of race and the people in his neighborhood who are almost entirely black. And Jessica Jones, I feel like in season 1, it's people who are affected by the person who affected her, Purple Man. In later, I think one of the biggest problems with later Jessica Jones is that she doesn't really find what that group is that she cares about. But yeah, go ahead.
I also think she has the classic noir trope of being fascinated by a mystery. Yeah. So like she also has that where that is her passion. Like that is one of the things that lights her up. Is she's like, I'm pushing this away, and then something intriguing happens that goes, okay, maybe that's an interesting mystery that I need to solve because that's who I am.
Well, and Jessica, I think, is actually one of the best examples also of that person who is torn between family and larger responsibility. And here, I mean, it kind of goes to what you were saying before, Matt. She doesn't have relationships. It's her responsibility towards her mother. And I feel like so much of, I think it's season 3 for Jessica Jones, where she's really balancing the fact that, on the one hand, her mother is a pretty provable public danger, and her responsibility towards the people, if that means anything, is to help get her mother locked up. But she winds up feeling she has more of a responsibility towards her mother and helping her.
That's season 2.
Yeah, that's season 2.
That's right. But yeah. What's the big bad of season 3?
Salinger?
Hellcat.
Salinger and Hellcat.
Oh, that's right. Salinger is the main bad, but Salinger drives Hellcat to being the big bad in the end. And I liked that season a lot. I liked that turn a lot.
Yeah, I had different feelings. That's a very different topic. But I guess just going back to the Ben thing for 1 second, and then we can keep moving on. How much of this do you think Ben meant? Like, and again, we've seen it in 8 different versions, and so but like when you think the phrase "with great power comes great responsibility," do you think that he means to take it to the level of guilt that Peter does? Do you think who does he mean that responsibility is to? What's your kind of what does that sentence really mean?
I think it's that he sees that Peter has this great power of his mind, and he says, wasting it is a waste. You have a responsibility to use your mind or to do something.
Right.
And I think that Ben leaves it ambiguous enough for Peter. Like, he's not saying, hey, you're a strong guy, you have a responsibility to go lift things. It's you have a responsibility to do something.
Right. Yeah, and
I think it should be left up. It should at least be left up to the hero as far as what that something is and how much it is reasonable to give.
Right. Yeah, I like that take on it, especially because I think that even leaves room for that you have responsibility towards yourself as well as to everybody else.
That's a good point.
So let's use that as kind of the next jumping off point. When we think about the idea of do heroes have responsibility, who is that responsibility to?
I mean, the easy answer is to say they've got a responsibility to the world, to use their power for the good of everybody. But when you say everybody, a lot of times you leave out the hero as far as who they have a responsibility to do good for. And, these threats keep coming up, much like Vision said, since Mr. Stark said, I am Iron Man, the threats have risen exponentially. So it's like they're always having to deal with something, and they never get a chance to really, flip off for any amount of time.
You deep in thought?
Yeah, it's a hard question because you want to say, you've got superpowers, you should use it because I don't have superpowers. What can I do?
Right.
And I guess that's really the question is like, what about the people? Is it reasonable for the people without superpowers to expect the person with superpowers to step up and do more? Can those people without superpowers, is it reasonable for them to sit back and do nothing to try to help? I mean, we see where Black Widow has no powers. Hawkeye has no powers, but they still step up. They say, I've got at least I've got these skills that everybody else could have developed, but they didn't. I have developed these skills, so I'm going to do what I can to try to save everybody. And they both being just human people in space on Vormir ended up being one of the most important decisions in the entirety of the MCU.
Right. And I think that's a really good point, especially the idea of when you go too far into this, like with great power comes great responsibility idea is, if I don't have great responsibility, does it mean I have no responsibility? Because I think that's a real danger. And I think, especially in TV shows like The Boys that get into this, but also in some other things, like there seems to be an idea of, well, I know Superman exists, I know Spider-Man exists, so I don't need to worry about it. And I think this is the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. There's so many that I get confused, but there's a couple of wonderful scenes there where Spider-Man is really like struggling, and the rest of the people of New York like come to help him and come to join in. I think it happens in a couple of different movies. And I always thought that was really touching, because that's a really idea of that instead of it being, if you have a power level of 5 or more, you have to help. If you're 4 or below, don't do anything. It's whatever your level of power, you have a responsibility to use that as you can to help.
There's a sliding scale of what you should be doing based on your power level.
Yeah.
Like, if you're just a Joe Schmo, throw a brick. If you're Spider-Man, like, use web shooters, swing around, jump off buildings, whatever.
Yeah. No, I think those are good points. And I think for me, where it also, though, comes down to is, I don't think this is a responsibility anyone can put on someone else. But as much as I want there to be a general responsibility towards, everything, and towards, humanity, and towards the world, and towards the universe, I also think it's very important that the characters who come from groups or backgrounds that aren't given as much weight and thought, that they feel a particular, responsibility towards that group. And here I'm thinking about someone like, Luke Cage with people who are victims of racism, and someone like Magneto, who I'm often going to argue is more of a hero than a villain, but however you see him, he feels that his responsibility is towards fellow mutants because of the way they were oppressed. And I think it can either be heroic or villainous, but that there's an interesting idea there where a person sort of feels like, it's not that I don't want to help everyone else, it's that these are my people, and so this is who I have a responsibility towards.
It's an interesting concept. I definitely, it is very in line with what I was mentioning a minute ago about having a passion to do a certain thing. That's not to say you shouldn't help in other ways, especially if you see needs in other places. The problem is with that is it's dangerously close to becoming the villain. I think of Star Trek, and I think of the ideals of Star Trek for me are this idea that over time you seek out new life and new civilizations. Like that's part of the tagline, and it's about figuring out what new life is like, new cultures are like, and incorporating them into the family that is the Federation, right? Like that's what the whole thing is with Star Trek. And I think the model there is you become a better person, and we're all stronger the more we incorporate more people into who are our people, And anytime you say my people versus their people, those are their people. I don't want you run the risk. I'm not saying it's the only thing you can do. Like you said, Luke Cage works for his people. Danny Rand works against the Hand. Like they all have these specific things they're working for or against, but like, you also run the risk anytime you do that, you run the risk of othering people, of being like that they're not my people, so they're not going to be ones I help. I mean, I don't think that's a trait we want in a hero. I think we want to be able to, and I think as human beings, I think part of our job as human beings is like we're born in a certain place in a certain culture, and we're supposed to slowly expand or like hopefully quickly expand what we think of as a person, like, like who we place value in, it is hard. Children are born and they recognize the people they're around, and that's why we should expose them to lots of people and cultures. but they're not always. And there's this intrinsic fear of people that are different. And I think like part of the responsibility of all of us is to like bring those things together. So I do think there's like a little bit of the risk there when you say like, I fight for my people. They do their thing.
I have a lot to say there, Jeff, but I want to let you jump in if you have anything to go on.
No, I'm just sitting here nodding.
Okay.
Like you can see that.
I think it's a really good point, Matt. And I guess the one place where I'd push back a little bit is I think, on that subject of othering, like I think the more everyone can be trying to say like, my people are everyone's people, that's the direction we should be going. The question happens what happens when your people are not seen as everyone's people by everyone else, and that's where, again, I go to both Luke Cage and Magneto, and in some ways this seems to be the biggest heart of the debate between Professor X and Magneto throughout the X-Men is, are mutants my people, or can mutants ever be seen as part of just everyone's people, and certainly Luke Cage, I think, is saying that in his day and age, in his world, much like in our own, many people of color are not yet seen they are already othered. And I think it gets you an even larger question for a lot of heroes is, to what extent do you need to say, like, I am going to live as though the reality I want exists? Or to what extent are you going to say, like, look, my people are already incredibly othered. I'm going to live into that. I think, like, switching over to the other side, like, Poison Ivy to me is a great example of what you're talking about, where her people are plants. And yeah, environmentally, like, we're kind of terrible to vegetation and plant life and natural life. But she takes it as, my responsibility towards the natural world is so high that I have no responsibility towards humanity, and I'll kill them, freely. And that's where she becomes a villain. And so, yeah, I think that balance is definitely there. I just think that a little bit of it has to be recognizing, like, how does the rest of the world see your people, whatever that is?
Yeah, and that's why I do think, and I don't agree with you that Magneto is I think he can be played more empathetically at times. But the reason he crosses the line into villainy for me is because, like, the two sides of the coin for Professor X and Magneto are, they both consider the mutants their people. They both say, mutants are my people. I am here to help mutants. The whole thing of Professor Xavier is trying to do is build a school for mutants and show the world that mutants can use their power for good, and show them that mutants aren't to be feared. But Magneto says, mutants are my people, and only mutants are my people. And that's what, to me, crosses the line into a villain. Like, you can love mutants, you can focus on mutants, you can want to help mutants, but once you start saying other people outside of my people, especially once you start saying they aren't valued, they aren't humans, or whatever. But that's kind of to me, that is the line that's being crossed that makes Magneto over the line to villainy.
The second that you start saying that another people are lesser, then you've gone too far. You become a villain.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. I think a lot of it depends on who's telling the story of Magneto, because I think when it becomes that, he very much becomes a villain. I think the place where I sympathize with him more than with Professor X is where I feel like, to me, the main thing they're arguing about is, will the rest of the world ever accept mutants as part of our people? Will mutants ever be part of humanity? And I think where I tend to agree with Magneto is when he's saying not humans are lesser than us, so let's kill them all. It's when he's saying humans will never accept us, so we have to stop trying to be accepted by them and fight them. And that's where I think he's correct and Professor X is wrong about that. But I do agree that he then very often becomes a villain, because you're right, because of exactly that. And
I want to take an aside and tell a really funny story for a second. I think it was in the 90s, Marvel skirted particular shipping and tariff laws.
Yeah, so good.
Where there were X-Men.
The rule was, it was like action figures versus dolls.
Yeah, well, it was,
and dolls.
It was human dolls, like human character dolls had a higher tax to be shipped, but
imported.
These were X-Men characters, so they were like, "Oh no, these are inhuman creatures. Like, these are mutants. They're not people." So
that's hilarious.
So they went to the courts. They went to the courts in the middle of the 90s when the whole thing was like, mutants are people too. That's the whole theme of the comics. They went to the courts to convince actual courts that mutants were not people so that they could import them for cheaper.
They saved a few bucks by telling everybody that mutants were not people.
I think that in a way that story should just be a part of like the introduction to every conversation that fans ever have, because it's such a great reminder of like, we like to go so deep on the canon and be like, no, this is what Magneto really believed. This is what Killmonger really believed, and have to be like, sometimes the writers are doing it because like it was just cheaper to animate this than animate that or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it didn't happen in the story at all. It's literally just in the courts of America, they like change the law to make mutants not people.
I know, but I think what I'm saying is like, and maybe I'm being overly cynical here, I have to imagine that someone in corporate at the in Marvel at some point said, "Hey, can we like maybe tone down the idea of arguing that mutants are people for a couple months while this is going through the courts?" You just have no idea.
Man,
dial it back. Just
I hope not. But possibly.
Let's actually continue with this though. Because part of where I think Magneto takes us is what I think is a really fascinating idea is what happens when it's the villain who sees themselves as having great responsibility because of their great power, and that becomes villainy. And Matt, you really kind of unlocked this whole idea for me when you mentioned Fisk as someone who was like this. Talk about that. How do you see Fisk as living up to Ben Parker's idea?
When I was a boy.
Well, Fisk is Batman.
Yeah.
Fisk is Batman. Like, he's Batman that doesn't have a problem killing, and he thinks that what he's doing is saving his city. He doesn't want to see another child have the same problems he had as a child. He went through a lot of trauma, and now he uses his considerable money to hire an army of people to do his bidding that he thinks is making his city safer.
I don't want to invoke Kevin Smith, but this is Fat Man is Batman.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Good
No,
one.
I think that's a good point. I think it's I tend to be very much on the not to start the whole Civil War debate, but part of why I'm on Team Tony, not Team Cap, is I think that one of the real dangers of with great power comes great responsibility is when you, the person with the power, also is the one to decide what your responsibility is without any accountability to anyone else, and anyone else to say like, maybe your own biases are coming into this too much. And to me, Fisk is a perfect example of that, where you're right. I think, and I've said this many times on the show, it's part of why Daredevil Season 1 may be my favorite piece of superhero media, certainly in the MCU. Well, actually, Daredevil Season 3, maybe even more so, but like, because it really gets into this idea with Fisk you could easily make that the show about Fisk instead of Daredevil, because he is so close to the line of being a protagonist instead of an antagonist, because he really does believe he is entirely the hero in his own story. And I love that season, especially because I think part of what it shows is not just that he's angry at Matt Murdock, but he's just so confused. He's like, I'm being a hero. What's the problem here? I'm killing Russian drug dealers. I'm killing heroin smugglers. I'm killing all these terrible people. And look what happened to me as a child. I don't ever want that to happen to someone else. So why isn't he Batman? What does make Fisk a villain then? Let me put it this way. Would Ben Parker be proud of Wilson Fisk?
No.
Why not?
Because instead of it's the Punisher versus Daredevil debate is what we have here on our hands currently. Is how far is too far to be a hero, and how far is too far gone? Because Daredevil doesn't consider Punisher a hero because he kills people. And that's not the right thing to do. That's wrong. You should imprison people and let the system do its work. But the problem is that Fisk is also in control of the system, and he's stacked the system against everyone else and in his favor, and he's okay with killing people. He's okay with using corrupt officials in the government or corrupt agents in like the FBI to do his bidding and to make sure that he stays in power, when really he should just be doing good things, and no one would think to get him out of his seat of power if he were just doing good stuff.
Well, kinda, but he couldn't have achieved the level of power he has without So, like, the thing with Fisk is he had to fight. Like, the thing that makes Fisk not Batman is Fisk was poor as a kid when he went through the stuff he went through. And so he had to fight and scrape and claw and do whatever he had to do to get the power to try to stop. But on the way, he got real dirty and real corrupt because that was the only lever he had to power, which kind of makes him even more of a tragic figure when you think about it in those Batman terms.
Do you think it's fair to say that he falls into the trap that you all were just talking about? Is that he starts to say, like, once he sees a person as a criminal or as too poor to be helped, or for some other reason, it seems there's a lot of people who he's able to say, those aren't my people, and so I'm not trying to save them. Do you think it's fair to say that Fisk kind of falls into that trap you were talking about?
I don't think that's the problem with Fisk. I think the problem with Fisk is he is wrong about his motivation. I think he thinks his motivation is saving the city, but if you really pay attention to like his actual actions, he just wants power. I think maybe at some point he wanted to save the city, and I think he still tells him that lie that that's what he's doing. But when he slams that guy's head in the car door, it's because he feels insulted. That had nothing to do with saving the city. Like, almost none of his actions actually do anything to save the city. The only one time it does that is when he does destroy all those Russian mobsters. So it seems to me like he is a case of he does some good things that sort of whitewash his other deeds to the point where it's like, hey, look how good and clean I am. Because I'm doing these things for the city, but really it's all about his own power, his own ego, his own feeling of powerlessness that he has as a child and never wanting to feel that again. And so I don't think Fisk is a hero. I think he is deceiving himself into thinking he's a hero. But if you just look at it on his terms, if you take him at face value of that, it's really hard to parse him from Punisher.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of why I admit I don't see Punisher as a hero. At least it's certainly not in the... I find him a very compelling character and fun to watch. But to me, he's very much in the anti-hero, almost villain category. At least as Netflix tells him.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, they're all different shades. And that's what's so interesting about that series of Defenders is it's just like there's so many shades that are so close together but that have these small distinctions. Because I don't think that Punisher is doing anything he's doing for his own power. I do think he is genuine in his belief that he's doing the right thing, which was what makes him an anti-hero to me. He's willing to cross lines that heroes aren't willing to cross, but he really is trying to do the best thing for people and trying to help. And it's sad and tragic that he is so lost, and he was part of a system that did so many dark things that he's lost his compass in such a crazy way.
Yeah.
I don't know that the show treats it as tragic, but I think it is tragic.
I think Punisher's a great connection because I think both Punisher and Killmonger. I want to get to Killmonger in a second, but I think both Punisher and Kingpin, Fisk, part of what they share is this horrific childhood, this horrific trauma that they've experienced. For Punisher, it's not childhood, and I feel like to some extent a part of what's happening is that their unprocessed feelings about that are part of what's changed. You know, that they're not. Punisher, to some extent, wants to believe he's just doing this to be noble and good and fix the world, but he's still so angry and broken up over what happened to his family, and he's lashing out because of that. And as we've talked about Kingpin, it's the exact same with him and his trauma. And this is not to say by any means that trauma leads you to be a violent killer. That's a horrible trope that's said in media a lot that I don't think is true in the slightest. But I think it's interesting to compare those two to Batman, where... Not always, and I know not everyone agrees with this, but I think in a lot of tellings of the Batman story, part of what allows him to be as heroic as he is, though in many ways an anti-hero, but is the fact that he's no longer... He is affected by what happened to his parents, but he's no longer in that, like, I need to kill people or I need to hurt people and stop people so I stop feeling bad about my parents. He's dealt with that. He's come to some resolution with that, but it's led him to believe he has to do these things, that he has this responsibility to try to stop things like that happening to other kids. Do you see that difference in terms of where Batman is with that trauma versus like someone like Kingpin or Punisher?
I think that Batman still has a line. Clearly he has a line that those don't. And he doesn't believe that he's wholly above the law. Like I think he has this sort of like man's laws and God's laws sort of thing going on with Batman, where he's like, man's laws are not working. I need to step in. But there's still this sort of like actual at the core of my being that I don't have the right to kill another human being. So I'm willing to do a lot of damage, but I'm not going to cross this line. And I think that is a thing that can make it puts him at another shade in this whole thing. And obviously he's very much like Daredevil in that way.
Well, and so let's continue with the shading. Who are other villains that we think also have this, like, they feel this responsibility because of their great power?
I think the Joker is a really good example. I'm just joking.
I was like, hold
Joker doesn't
the phone.
Fit into this conversation in any way.
Get out. You keep bringing up Killmonger, and I think that he's an interesting one in that, in Black Panther, this is a villain. This is an antagonist that won the moral argument over our hero, and he comes in from the side of Wakanda has done nothing in the past to help people like us. People like Wakandans, black people. We've got so many brothers and sisters all over the world who are oppressed every day. And we have the means, we have the ability to go out there and stop that oppression. We should do that. We have that great power. Yeah. We need to use it. And he takes it, he obviously takes it too far in that, he wants to go out and just arm everybody, which is one could say that's the wrong way to go about it. But in the life that he's lived, you could see where he's coming from. Oh, yeah. Where if everybody that is black was armed with a superior weapon, then nobody would want to screw with them, every day. Like,
yeah, it goes back to, he's Magneto, he's exactly the same thing. Like, I think that I love Killmonger. I think he does win. He wins part of the moral argument. He wins the fact that Wakanda has not been taking. They have great power, and they have not been responsible to their people at all. And it's not even.
I think they've been very responsible towards the people of Wakanda. They haven't been responsible towards other people of color or other humans or wider. Exactly.
Right. So they are. What Killmonger is saying is we need to open up to help other black people and take out the rest of the system if we have to. And what our hero ends up saying to T'Challa is like, he's right. We need to open up. We need to help people of color, but we also need to be friends of the world. Yeah. It's very much the same like sort of balance between Magneto and Professor X that we have. That we've discussed over and over, this same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't be Judge, Judy, and Executioner.
Yeah. Cute. I agree with that. I think Killmonger is a really good example because of everything we're talking about, because I think you're right. I think Ben Parker would look at T'Challa and say, like, look, you have this power. You need to be more responsible in how you're using it. But then would go to Killmonger and be like, whoa, well, not quite that far. Because Killmonger...
Pump the brakes there,
he
kid.
definitely falls into that idea of... Yeah. I'm responsible towards my people and to hell with everybody else. Well, and so let me switch to another villain who I think, at least as I see it, also has this feeling of his great power brings great responsibility. But then I think most of us would feel like uses that great responsibility in some pretty terrible ways, although it's debatable. And it's one, Matt, I think you're going to have a lot of feelings on because you've done so much with the TV show and the movie The Watchmen. And namely, I'm talking about Ozymandias. And here, spoilers for Watchmen, so if you want to skip ahead a few minutes, go for it. But for those who've seen it or just know about it, basically Ozymandias is someone who I think is rightly understood to be one of, if not the smartest person on the planet, and has incredible power because of it. And he winds up believing that his power, like, that the world is going to destroy itself in nuclear war, but that his intelligence, he can basically trick everyone into thinking that this terrible thing is happening, and so they shouldn't have a nuclear war. They should all unite against this idea of an alien threat. And he winds up doing it, and in the process killing millions of people, fundamentally changing society, never asking anyone else's opinion, but doing it because he thinks, I have the power to stop this nuclear war, and so I have a responsibility to do it. What's your kind of take on Ozymandias and where he falls in all this?
I think he's just an utter narcissist. He thinks he has the I have great power, so I'm the only one with any responsibility, and I must do this. And I think there's a sense of narcissism there, and we've talked about the whole burnout thing and sort of activism burnout and all that stuff. Like that is, it also can stem from a belief that you are the only one that can help, and you are the only one that can do the things you need to do. You are the only one that can edit the podcast, you know? Sorry, that's off mic joke. But I think he's just a narcissist. I don't think that there's really any evidence. Like he sees, well, I think there's a lot of evidence external to the text. I mean, it's a different world than ours. It's a different world, but we also had a close call with the Russians, you know, in our Cold War that never actually sparked. And we didn't need an Ozymandias to do what he did. We didn't need him to create extra-dimensional squid monsters to scare us into, and in the process kill millions of people. We didn't need that. So I think that in itself is evidence to the fact that, like, Ozymandias thinks he knows what's best, but he doesn't necessarily. And the risk he's taking with killing millions of people because he's so sure he's right, I think that's too far. I think that's what makes him a villain. And including in the new show, spoiler alert for the new show, Jeff, I don't know if you've even seen it.
I haven't. I'm going to skip ahead.
Okay, skip ahead 30 seconds. Hit that button, Jeff. When at the end, when he ends up going against Lady True, you have seen it, right, Matthew? At the end, when he goes up against Lady True, it's because she wants the power of Dr. Manhattan, and he believes there's no way Lady True will do the right thing. And I think that's because he knows with absolute power there's no way he would do the right thing. And like there's an argument that can be had, like Dr. Manhattan had this power all this time, and he hasn't destroyed the world. And all Lady True is trying to do is she's like, you haven't done enough. I want this power so I can destroy our nuclear arsenal. Like her plan is very sound. And like we all kind of like, ooh, no, we don't want anybody to have that power. But like, again, there's like kind of evidence in the text that Dr. Manhattan had that power for 50 years or whatever and didn't do anything horrible with it. And it's sort of this like, he believes so hard. He is such a villain, and he knows that he would do bad things with that power. He trusts no one but himself to do right by the world, even though he very much does wrong things. He's just a narcissist. I think that's just like that's him in a nutshell. He's just an utter narcissist.
It sounds a lot like the interpretation of Apocalypse that I have kind of cemented in my brain based on the movie and based on the headcanon rewrite that I've done recently for Apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's just based on his, if you remember in X-Men Apocalypse, for the one time that you watched that, if you remember his monologue when he took over Charles's brain, kind of, and reached out to the world. He said, "No more stones, no more slings, no more spears," and he was basically just taking away the all of the toys that that the humanity or that humanity in general could play with and hurt each other with, because they were not being responsible with it. So obviously they need to have their toys taken away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing, and I appreciate, Matt, the way you describe it as narcissism, and I think that's accurate. And to me, I put it in slightly different terms, but very similar, which is hubris, which I think is the to me one of the biggest dangers of having great power and thinking it gives you great responsibility is then thinking like, okay, so I need to decide, and no one else ever gets to decide because I have this responsibility.
Right. Well, that's a whole different thing. Do you have a responsibility to do the thing, and do the decisions also rest on your shoulders, which is also a Sokovia Accords issue. It's like they're not saying to the Avengers, you don't have responsibility to do things. We still want you to do things. We still want you to save the world, but we want to make the decisions for you on what you do and when you do it.
Part of why they're doing it is because another person who I think out of extreme narcissism and hubris decided that he knew best what would save the world and didn't need to talk to anybody about it, except maybe Bruce Banner, was Tony Stark. Like, Ultron, to me, is very much
Right.
a creation of Tony Stark falling. In some ways, like, you want to talk about the balance, all you need to do is follow the story of Tony Stark, because he goes to both extremes so frequently. Because, on the one hand, he says, like, I have, it is all my responsibility, in part because he thinks, like, he caused some of the problems that happened before. And Ultron to me is his giant squid monster, in a way. Or his, it's his attempt to say, like,
sure.
I have this power. And I feel like part of why I judge both him and Ozymandias so harshly is if you exist in a world where you're the only superhero, I understand the thought of, like, no one else can do this. No, but Ozymandias has all the other Watchmen. I mean, they're mostly kind of incompetent, but, he technically has them. The Owlman is going to, Mr. Hooters, as I like to call him, he's not going to do much, but theoretically the others are. And Tony Stark, certainly, I mean, he's got Captain America, he's got Bruce Banner, he's got all these other great people. And to me, that's where the narcissism and hubris really comes in, is when he says, like, no, I still have to do this, and everyone else be damned.
Well, that's the thing, is they still got all these other people that are, even if they're not as powerful and maybe they're incompetent, like, physically, they're still smart people who have a moral center and a moral compass. And they can still serve as a sounding board
Right.
of what should happen and what is wrong or right.
Right, because I think in part they can help you see the biases that you're missing. The things that a Fisk or a Killmonger or an Ozymandias or Tony Stark that they're not thinking about. If you're accountable to others, you can have other people saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you're missing out on this part." So I think that's a good way of talking about villains. I'm just because we're going for a while and I want to make sure we cover a couple other topics. So what are some of the factors you think that can change how much responsibility you think a person does or doesn't have? And I guess the place I wanted to start with is, does the way in which they get the power, do you think, change how much responsibility they do or don't have?
Like if they chose the power? Is that kind of what you're getting
If
at?
they sought the power out versus having the power thrust upon them by a science experiment accident.
Right. To me, someone like Luke Cage, I think of as someone who never wanted this power, fought against it. Does that give him any of a, not excuse, but, like, does that give him somewhat of an out about the responsibility in a way that someone like Tony Stark or Captain America or others who actively sought out that power don't necessarily have?
Oof. I mean, that's a dangerous question to ask, because if you say, everybody who has, like, if you have power at all, then you have a responsibility, then you could easily say that, somebody who thrusts power upon other people forces them to have responsibility
Right.
for others in society. And that's not fair to those people who didn't want those powers to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, to me, have either of you seen Umbrella Academy?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
It's
I want to
so
see it
good.
soon. I'll skip
It is
forward
so
30
good,
seconds.
Jeff. Maybe you and I should talk about it on Panda Watch at some point, because another season of that's coming out. But I'll just say this in the most broad terms to not spoil anything. A big part of that story is the idea of this person who literally seeks out babies he thinks are going to have great power and teaches/forces them to become superheroes without any regard to their own personal lives or choices.
Doesn't even give them names.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think it's a great example of what you're talking about, of, like, he's just, nope, you have no choice in this. You have this power. I think you have this responsibility, and so I'm not going to give you any choice in it whatsoever.
Yep.
So yeah, I do feel like that. I feel like it excuses it somewhat. Not excuses, but it changes how much responsibility a person has. But then in Luke Cage, I mean, he spends a lot of that show fighting against the responsibility, but he does eventually take it up, right? The second half of this last season notwithstanding. We'll talk about that in a moment. But, like, what do you think of Luke Cage's decision? Because he does eventually decide, like, he does have this responsibility.
I think that if you have something like that thrust upon you, that you don't necessarily have to have, you don't necessarily have the absolute responsibility of using that power, because it's not something you sought out. It's not something that you wanted. It was forced upon you. It was not your choice. But the moment that you step up to try to do something for someone else, or the moment that you do take on a responsibility, you at least should start looking at yourself as, maybe I've got more responsibility to my fellow man than I thought that I did previously. Because, doing it ad hoc, every now and again, only when it suits you, is also selfish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to see it. I definitely feel like Luke Cage is one who, I kind of mentioned this before, winds up kind of deciding to do it on his own terms. And I mean, he certainly takes a turn at the end of season 2 that we can talk about in terms of how that fits into this. But Luke at least does feel like I don't remember if he actually says this at one point, but I sort of get the sense from him throughout season 1 is he's kind of saying like, okay, I'll be the hero, but I'm not going to be a hero other people want me to be. I'm going to be a hero on my own terms.
Yeah. Hero is your word, not mine.
Yeah. Does he actually say that?
That's something that I'm pretty sure he says that, and Jessica says that.
Yeah.
Ah, man. And like there was so much with Luke Cage on like responsibility, and like if he's showing off the way that he was at the beginning of season 2 and taking videos and like throwing tires around and running faster, him say him faster than Usain Bolt.
Yeah.
And like if he's doing that, like that, you should step up. If you're saying to the world that you exist and you have all these powers, like you should probably do something about it instead of just showing off.
I think it's a good point, Jeff. And I think maybe to illustrate both this, and I think the other thing that changes responsibility is if you compare someone like Luke Cage to someone like Danny Rand, Iron Fist. Because to me, they're polar opposites in a couple of ways where Danny Rand really sought out the power that he wanted. He went and fought to become the dragon. And also Danny Rand, just because of the different places they hold in our society, has much more like safety to some extent. Like, rich white man decides to become a vigilante is going to be treated very differently by the cops and by the media than angry black man, as he's going to be portrayed. And so I feel like some of my favorite scenes are when Luke and Danny Rand are talking to each other, and to some extent both of them call the other out because they kind of recognize the very different places they hold and that they have a very different approach to responsibility for, I think, understandable reasons. And I think I'm glad Luke becomes a hero, but at least in my mind, Danny Rand has much more of a responsibility to become a hero. Yeah,
absolutely. And, I have to agree that Danny Rand and Luke Cage being together is probably where they're best. They should probably do a show just about those two.
That'd be a fun idea. Did anyone ever write something like that? Or was that ever a thought?
I can't remember.
One more way in which I'm so annoyed that we lost out on the Marvel Netflix, because I do think we were going to get that. And maybe we still will on Disney+, but who knows?
I hope so.
I hope we get Heroes
really
for Hire.
Hope so.
That would be great.
Yep. That would...
Because Heroes for Hire could expand outside of just Power Man and Iron Fist. It's got... Heroes for Hire had so many other heroes that were, for hire.
Right.
So that could introduce anybody.
Well, I have not read any of the comics, but I feel like even that name kind of is an interesting push on this, because you think, like, of all the reasons a hero is supposed to do the things that they do, to get paid generally is not considered one of the most heroic motivations. And yet, like, you do got to make a buck. Although Danny Rand should have a buck to some extent. But, like, I'm wondering, in the comic, did they ever explore that? Like, the degree to which their willingness to take on clients who can't hire them, who can't pay them?
I think Jessica Jones does that more.
They definitely do. We read one Luke Cage comic, and it's often that he's being hired by someone who can't really afford it, and he just kind of works it out or whatever. But I do think that they like in a lot of these comics and TV shows where the Angel is one where they get hired, which I always enjoyed. And he like has like a sliding scale where if the person's rich, he makes them pay, and if the person's poor, he doesn't. If they can afford it, he still helps anyone that comes to ask him for help. But there are definitely some episodes of that show of Angel where he has to go, this guy can't pay, or like they have to deal with that when he starts to. I think it's like when he has a kid. He has a kid and he starts to have to like have money for diapers and stuff, and he starts to be like, ooh, can you pay? I don't know if I can take this case. We need to get a payday. I've got to build a nest for my kid to live in. Like, it's that classic thing. It's really
pretty
funny.
Soon we're going to have an episode coming out about espionage, and specifically the TV show Burn Notice. And one of my favorite parts of that show is that, in theory, they always have clients, but probably half their clients can't afford to pay. And you have debates between the characters about, like, some of them are a lot grumpier than others about taking on these people who can't pay, but they always still do so. So yeah, those are fun dynamics.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Let's kind of start. Are there any other characters who just kind of, we've established a lot of the different ideas that go into why you do or don't have responsibility and what are the dangers? Are there any specific characters who we haven't gotten into who we think are interesting to talk about in terms of where they fall on this? How do they live up to the responsibility? Do they live up to it too much? How do we feel about them?
I think that there are certain situations where maybe somebody should not take on responsibility, even though they have power. People like the Hulk or Moon Knight or Sentry, if we're talking Marvel. Like, Moon Knight is a paranoid schizophrenic. Specifically, he's got dissociative personality disorder, where one of those personalities is a hero. Like, maybe he should seek out help for that. When the Hulk rages out and gets super strong, yeah, he can take on the threats that are in front of him, but he also has a high likelihood of destroying everything around him and potentially hurting a lot of people. I mean, Sentry becomes the Void when things get too rough, and he's mentally breaking down pretty much all the time. Like, these are terrifying things to have in the world. Like, maybe they should be benched for a little bit.
I mean, to me,
maybe there should be something other than just power in that conversation. Maybe, like, I was thinking about this earlier, like, what does power mean? And clearly the Hulk has power, but there's certain jobs that he's not good for. And so you kind of have to have power, but also control, and also, like, you have to be right for the job. You know what I mean? Like, to hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know that phrase, like, to Hulk, everything looks like an opportunity to smash. Whereas
stairs.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point, and it gets back to actually where I keep going with these arguments, which is Civil War, because I feel like Scarlet Witch to me is a great example of someone who has great power. And here I'm not sure I blame her as much as I blame Captain America for putting her in the field, but she hasn't quite learned how to use that power responsibly, in terms of how to minimize collateral damage. And I think that's an interesting idea with all these characters of is part when we say responsibility, is that responsibility to use your power, or is it responsibility to know how to temper your power, or to know how to balance the power, that kind of thing.
To know when to not use your power.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point. That responsibility word may mean different things. Means you have the responsibility to have discretion. Any
other characters I know we want to kind of try to wrap up pretty soon, but any others we want to touch on here?
Can't think of any.
Squirrel Girl. You have a responsibility to show me you beating the villain in the panels, not off screen.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. I haven't watched as much Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in a while, so I'm not really sure but I feel like to some extent this is a big thing for Sky Daisy. In terms of, like, her coming to understand her power and coming to decide, like, what is her responsibility and who is her responsibility to.
I don't know. I don't know if I've seen it. I feel like she's been a pretty on the Ben Parker train pretty early. Even when she didn't have power, like didn't have actual Quake powers, she's in the van trying to do what she can to tell the truth. She's a pretty
I think it's a good point. She always has it. It's in some ways I feel like again, I haven't seen season 1 in a while, but isn't this kind of part of the debate that Coulson and her have? Is Coulson is saying, like, you have a responsibility to use your powers in this other way instead of in this, like, one person blogging in a van kind of thing?
He definitely wants to kind of get her to level up and use the well, it's interesting because basically she is trying to bring down S.H.I.E.L.D. because S.H.I.E.L.D. is a secret and she wants to, like, reveal it or whatever. It seems like, and then they're trying to get her to work with them and use her powers for their purposes. So it's interesting.
I think it's one more factor for all of this is the idea of with great power comes responsibility, and part of that's like, how much do you know? That sometimes you can only see a small picture, and so you think my responsibility is to do this, but actually there's, as happens with Daisy and Coulson, like there's so much that Daisy doesn't realize at that point, or Sky at that point, I realize, as her name is. Yeah. Well, cool. There's been a good discussion. So where does it kind of leave you off? How would you, what do you think would be your like best interpretation at this point of the Ben Parker Maxiom as it should apply to heroes?
Well, it depends on the hero.
Sure. I think it's generally like the Ben Axiom, if we're going to, as it applies to heroes, but also just as it applies to anyone, I think it's generally a good rule of thumb, but there are exceptions and there are limitations to it. And anytime, any axiom like that, where it's just like, hey, this is the thing, this is the answer, like that's never true. There's always caveats, there's always exceptions. And I think we've gone over a lot of them today, which I feel like mostly what we did on this episode, we pushed back on the idea that with great power comes great responsibility, which I think it was the point. Like, is he right? Like, we're really trying to examine that. And I think it's a great thing to teach children. I think it's a great thing for us to feel as adults, but it's something that we have to watch ourselves so we don't become these various types of villains.
Well, I think it's to me, this is what ethics is all about. And this is what I think these stories are all about, is to take the maxims that we believe and to complicate them somewhat. On the first day of my first course in the first class I took in ethics in grad school, the professor was asking us, like, what is or is not a moral act? And one of the first things she said is, if I take a knife and cut you open, is that a moral act? And of course, everyone was like, no, of course not. And she says, what if I'm a doctor and I'm taking out your bloated appendix? And we were like, oh, okay, well, yeah. And that's the idea, is that, like, there are so many different actions that can look so different based on the context. And I think you're right. Part of what we've done here is to kind of push back somewhat, but I also think it's that we've broadened out this idea of, with great power comes responsibility, but what is the responsibility? The responsibility towards humanity, towards the planet, towards yourself, towards your family. Is it responsibility to use your power, or to be thoughtful in how you use your power, or to be tempered in how you use your power? That it's, there's just all sorts of different levels we can think about this on.
I think the next step of this discussion is to talk about mutants.
How so?
Because these are people that, it's not just that they have power thrust upon them, it's that they've had this dormant all along, and they get changed in a way to where society hates them, but they also have a power. But is it right for Xavier to, have an academy where he's training a hit squad almost?
Yeah.
For these people, like, do they have a responsibility to be heroes with this power if they, again, if they never wanted it? Like, these are children. Yeah. These are children.
Well, like, it goes back to one of my favorite TV shows that I know is not really well watched. I don't think either of you have seen it, but Babylon 5 is very interesting science fiction. In a lot of ways, it's a take on Star Trek. But one of the things it really goes into is, what if you have a whole bunch of people who have the power of mind control? Well, okay, people running around in mind control powers can really screw up the world. So we're going to put a whole bunch of limitations on them in terms of, like, their ability to do, they can't go to gambling establishments and stuff like that. And, like, that makes sense, but also, is it fair to them, to limit them just because they have this power they didn't choose? So, well, cool. This has been a great discussion. Thank you both so much for taking part. To those who are listening, thank you as always. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think? Is Ben Parker right? Are some of these maxims actually more accurate than we've talked about? What do you think about what we said? What are your own takes on it? We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter at Superhero Ethics. You can email us at superheroethics@gmail.com. And I know both of these folks have a lot of great things that they're putting out into the world that are places where you can connect with them and also hear their other thoughts. So, Matt, why don't you start? Tell us more about where people can hear more of your stuff going on.
Well, as we talk about this, we're only a couple days away from having it all set up where you can really find stuff easily. But strandedpanda.com is our network, which I'm sure you've mentioned here on the cast. And strandedpanda.com is the network that houses Superhero Ethics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, which is probably the easiest thing to go listen to if you're a podcast listener, which obviously you are. You're in the second hour of this here podcast, so I'm assuming you listen to podcasts. So check out the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, but the strandedpanda.com is where we have all of our different podcasts that kind of cover the gamut at this point. We're doing a lot of different things, a lot of TV and movies and ethics and music, which is my other thing that I do, as I do music for a living. And my name is Matthew Carroll. You can find me on Spotify, Apple, Google, all those things. Or my band is called The Garage, and we just put out a Star Trek album called Earl Grey Hot. So if you like Star Trek, check that out. And I've got another Star Trek based album coming out real soon. So all of that, strandedpanda.com. Check it all out.
And Jeff?
Well, I co-host that Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. We talk about so much, and Mr. West Fox and I are big fans of the Star Wars universe, and we do the Star Wars Universe podcast. I'm one of the several co-hosts that you have
rotating chair. And I think you're getting a new podcast started, right?
I am. I'm building out a new podcast that is focused on kind of headcanoning better stories out of movies and scripts that have failed us, that had a good story to begin with, but just somewhere went off the rails. With a new co-host that I work with every day at the office. We're basically framing it to be a water cooler discussion, so to speak.
Cool. We'll look forward to that. And folks, links to all those podcasts and all the great work that both Matt and Jeff do is all going to be in the show notes. Check them out. All part of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. Some that I'm on, some that are just other great works, and that really inspired me as a podcaster. If you're a fan of any of this kind of media, this is a great way to listen to it, to really get to dive back in, and you'll even find yourself probably wanting to watch some things you didn't think you'd watch, just to hear different perspectives on it. So, Matt, Jeff, fantastic conversation as always. Thank you so much. To our fans, thank you so much for being a part of this, and have a good day.
Until next time, true believers.
Wrong podcast, Jeff.
Sorry, allow it.
Damn it.
One last thing I want to announce is that the Stranded Panda Podcast Network does a really great job of everyone supporting each other. And this week I'm really happy that Matt and Jeff have said that this podcast, Superhero Ethics Podcast, is the one they want to focus on. So what that means is from today until the end of next week, if you write a review for Superhero Ethics, on iTunes is the best way to do it, but anywhere else you can. If you write a 5-star review for Superhero Ethics, say a little bit about what you like about the podcast, why you want to give it a good review, you'll be entered into a drawing just with the people who review Superhero Ethics, and the winner of that gets their choice of either a Superhero Ethics t-shirt or an MCU t-shirt. So it's a great chance to win, and you'll also, for every review you write, also be entered into a larger drawing to get the Avengers video game that is coming out for a number of different platforms in the fall of this year. So if you write a review for Superhero Ethics, give us 5 stars, and then, just say a sentence or two about what you like. You can't just say, I'm doing this for the t-shirt. You got to actually say something about the podcast. It's a great way to help the podcast. It helps us grow, and it gives you a chance to win something from our friends here at the MCU podcast. So I hope you'll take part in that. And if you don't think we deserve 5 stars, well, I'd still love to hear a review from you. Let us know what we're doing well. Let us know what we could change. All these things help us improve the podcast, help us grow the network, help us bring you the kind of content that makes you sign up for. So with that in mind, Jeff, Matt, thank you so much for being our guests today. Thank you so much for taking part in this support of my podcast and this review drive. It's been great having you, great conversation. To all of our fans, thank you so much. Write those reviews, send in your thoughts, send in your comments. We'd love to keep talking to you. And have a great day.